we got to get to this press conference stuff. I'll just play the answer that took the cake for me from Bill DeWitt. And it was the last question, I believe, from the formal press conference for me.
My head is spinning, so I don't really remember everything. So this will be good for me to hear it back.
Again, he was asked, I think, almost 2 separate times. Okay, player development hasn't been all that great. Yeah. So what went wrong, essentially, and why are there needed changes for player development? Here was Bill DeWitt Jr., the owner of the St. Louis Cardinals, earlier this afternoon.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, we've had a pretty good run of young players coming through the system. But I would say in the last few years, not a ton of years, teams have beefed up and gotten more analytical. I think we were pretty much at the forefront a number of years ago and stayed there and, went along and kept improving. But, the industry, I think, saw the value of going all in on player procurement, player development, and, we were doing fine, and we're winning and having good teams. So, we didn't really quite catch up.
What?
That's it, though.
What?
I mean, that's the quote that pins him down. That's the quote that pins down the Cardinals on where they screwed up. They got, Andy, I said it all week, they got complacent. And that is the one quote from that press conference where you have to read through the lines because he didn't admit it necessarily, but it pins him down on this is what happened. We did get complacent. The rest of the game was prioritizing this, that, and the other. And, we were winning still, so we didn't really prioritize that stuff because we didn't think we had to. We got, complacent because we thought we were in good shape.
But it just sounds, again, like this guy saying, we had some good players, you've had good young players here come up and say, but then, we have to change everything that we've done about player development over the last few years. But not a ton of years, just the last few years.
It's
not
really two that they've lost in a row, right?
Only 2 years that we've had problems with players.
But the year before that, they had veterans like Molina and Pujols still around. I mean, they had a Babe Ruthian charge from Albert Pujols in the second half of 2022 to cover up some warts, or that team might not have made the playoffs. That is the answer, Andy. You're right. That's the money quote. You have to kind of dig through a little bit to maybe ascertain why that's such an important quote. But you're right. He was asked about that multiple times because you're holding a whole press conference to spell out that the need for improvement in this specific area. Here's Heim Bloom, the guy that can come in and spend the next year improving, and we're going to beef up, and we're going to the words that Bloom used was ownership has greenlit us to invest in these areas, and player development is going to be the thing that benefits from it the most. They've greenlit to put resources toward that. But the implication there is that they hadn't previously. And that's why I can't put all of this on John Mozeliak, because he was operating under the constraints placed on him by ownership. And I think ownership got complacent to think, Mo has always done such a good job, he's going to continue. The extent to which Mozeliak ever kind of challenged DeWitt and said, Bill, we really need this, this, and this, man, if we're going to keep up. That's what maybe will never really be known, because if you're Mozeliak, you're getting your swan song, you're getting your last year without fear of retribution, without fear of being fired. Like, you're just going to get to hang out and, whatever you do, there's no recourse for it because you're never going to be fired. You're going to be ushered off into the sunset. So John Mozeliak is not going to speak ill. He's not going to give those breadcrumbs that we would need to fully understand the degree to which Bill DeWitt is to blame for all of this. But I think that has to be a pretty significant portion of it, Andy. Not absolving Mo in any way, because he still is the head of the baseball ops. And look, if it's true, the reporting from earlier in the week, and look, I was in a session with Mozeliak after the press conference ended where multiple questions were geared around what that pie look like, the amount that you devote to major league revenue or major league payroll versus investing in the minors and infrastructure. Like, what did that look like? What's it going to look like? And he kind of danced around those questions. So, without really knowing the extent to which he pushed to say, hey, we're falling behind, I have to include Mozeliak in that as a problem in conjunction with DeWitt, where they fell behind in these areas. They got complacent to think that they didn't need to be the industry leader in this category that they had been. That was the whole point in bringing Mo in the first place in 2007. I say bringing in. He was in the org. They elevated him to be the head honcho because Walt Jocketty was really good at trading for players that other people didn't want to pay and pulling off these trades. And how'd you get Scott Rowland? How'd you get Jim Edmonds? It worked out, but then baseball got smarter, and they needed to get smarter with it. And Mozeliak and his crew were the group to do that. But it's like Bill DeWitt forgot that history can repeat itself because the exact same thing has happened where they got complacent to say, we didn't really get behind. But you didn't hear DeWitt really admit it, to your point, right, Andy. You didn't really hear him take ownership of and accountability over that this had happened on his watch. You didn't hear that from Bill DeWitt today.
Didn't say anything like, we got it wrong, we failed, essentially like that.
No, he pushed back. Right. The clip you played was him pushing back and saying, well, I must say we have some pretty good young players that have come up, and you're missing the boat, my friend. You're missing the boat.
Here was his response about player development and how it's looked over the last few years or so. And he was, I believe, asked by Katie Wu, like, it's maybe looked not all that great. How would you maybe assess it? Here was his response.
I'm not sure I would agree with the assessment. There's been a concern for the years. We've done pretty well in drafting and developing players historically. I think the bar has risen, as Heim would say, and there's much more analytics now attached to it. You look at our team, and where did these players come from? We've got. I think I could be wrong about this, but I think I saw that our 6 young players played the most innings this year of any other team's 6 youngest players. So obviously we've had success in that model, and but things move and change, and as Heim says, if you don't keep up, you're going to fall behind. So this is a matter of catching up to a degree and building to a degree.
Oh, well, that's encouraging. Well, the Cardinals, their 6 youngest players played the most innings out of anybody else's 6 youngest players. Problem solved.
How many games did they win?
Yeah.
That totally ignores
they had a winning
results.
Hey, they had a winning record. You stop.
They did.
They had a winning record. Yeah?
They had a winning record, and that's why it should be incredibly disappointing to Cardinals fans that instead of saying, hey, we gained 12 games over last year's record and we're ready to take the next step next year, they're pivoting in the opposite direction. They're telling you payroll's going to go down.
Yeah.
And when John Mozeliak was asked about what that means for guys like Sonny Gray, Nolan Arenado, Wilson Contreras, the veterans of the team, Mo basically said, I'm going to have to talk to those guys. Because we're going to have to see who wants to be around and who doesn't. And how could you blame any one of them if they're like, well, this isn't what I was promised. This isn't what I was told being a Cardinal would be. This is a bait and switch. Yeah, get me somewhere that I have a chance to win while I'm in my mid-30s and I'm still in my prime. You will not see all 3 of Arenado, Sonny Gray, and Contreras on the Cardinals next year, I don't think, after today's press conference. I think that is, now again, Mozeliak couldn't say, he was asked, well, how do you decide which contracts to get rid of and which to keep? He didn't have a way to answer that because he hasn't talked with those guys, and he kept saying, I don't know what revenues are expected to be yet. Going to need that model from the business folks, from Billy III, to kind of get an idea for what we have to work with and how much we might have to decrease payroll. But the truth of the matter is, it might be out of his hands. It might be in the hands of Nolan Arenado, Sonny Gray, and Wilson Contreras, who just last week, Andy, if you'll recall, said, we got a lot of holes in this lineup, and we'll see if the front office is going to do anything about it. Wilson, my man, I hate to tell you, but today I did not get the indication from the Cardinals that they are going to fill the holes to the best of their ability for the 2025 lineup. That's not the direction this is going. So if I'm Wilson, I'm going, okay, this is not what I was told it was going to be a Cardinal. I'm Arenado. It's not why I waived my no trade to come here. Sonny Gray, thanks for the money, but So I don't really, that's going to be very fascinating to see where they go. And that's before you get into the tier of Ryan Helsley's going to make some money next year. Do you have to move Helsley in order to make sure you start to beef up the farm system again? Are these going to be the types of moves that we see the Cardinals make? It opened up a lot of questions, to your point, Andy. You said I left today with more questions than answers, and that, I think, is probably fair and maybe the way that a lot of Cardinals fans are feeling right now about the 2025 season. Long term, I think we know what they're looking to do, but what's that going to mean for the interim? We'll see, man. We'll see over the coming months.
875 KTGR. Call or text us here with your thoughts on the Cardinals after their press conference today, their end-of-season press conference announcing the changes that they're making going forward. Let's get to Old Jay here on the KTGR hotline. Old Jay, what's up?
Okay, first off, if the ACC or the Big Ten want that many automatic bids, Notre Dame has to join 11. That's rule one.
Yeah, Notre Dame would have to.
That tells you how much that'll ever happen.
Yeah.
Probably so. I mean, they're limiting themselves if they don't.
Yeah. Number two, Andy, do your Astros have golf times for this weekend made yet?
Oh, gosh.
Oh,
and it begins.
So it begins. I was preparing to have to face Royals fans' arrows this week, but instead I get Old Jays. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know.
You know what? I'm just as funny as it sounds, I just can't believe they made it.
I love that they made it, honestly. It was great.
0.22% chance August 10th, and they're in. I mean, that's just stupid. As far as the Cardinals, I think one of the signs that kind of made me worried was when they sent Jordan Walker down earlier this season, and he was like, oh, yeah, up there they kept trying to tell me to hit it up in the air. Down here they're just telling me to hit it wherever. And I'm like, wait a minute. So we're having conflicting, why aren't both sides talking about, hey, let's develop this on this guy. Let's develop. So I'm like, so what are we doing? And is DeWitt running for president? Because, I mean, that's how you run for president. You talk out of both sides of your mouth and don't make sense because it really worries me because if this is the direction that the Cardinals are going in and this is the guy that's supposed to take over, what?
Yeah, I mean, and essentially that is right. I mean, it's the politician's approach to this. And appreciate the call, Jay, here on the Big Show. You don't admit anything that you did wrong. You try to pick out the positives, even from the periods where you did go wrong, and you try to make people believe that's why they should trust you going forward. And,
you know what?
That was Bill DeWitt's approach.
That did kind of feel like a presidential debate, not to get political for people, but it's like, yeah, we didn't really get any sense that they really fully understand or comprehend the common folk, the Cardinal fan that's out there that maybe has season tickets, or Andy, maybe they take their family. Maybe they live in mid-Missouri and they take their family 2 or 3 times a year over to St. Louis to take in a ball game for a weekend series. They come over and they do that once a year. I don't really know that they necessarily fully understand what the gripes that those folks are having about the way they've been sold a bill of goods in recent years. It was also funny to hear as well, Bill DeWitt III, who runs the business operation, and again, eventually he'll be the chairman. He'll be the principal owner of this team at whatever such time that DeWitt Jr. decides to pass it down. He was asked about, well, what do you sell to the fans for 2025 on why they should come to the ballpark? And he immediately was like, well, we're trying to beef up our game day experience, and we're going to offer some perks to season ticket holders. And, I get it. He runs the business side of things, so that's kind of where he spends his time and energy. He doesn't spend it on who should be the setup man that they trade for, right? That's not his jurisdiction. However, the optics of that were like, oh, boy. They're not going to the marketing of this coming team. You're going to see the young guys, because that might be all that's left by the time this. I don't know how much of a teardown it's going to be, Andy, but today didn't paint a picture of, it's going to be just some minor tweaking here and there. You could see big name veterans, Paul Goldschmidt's name was not said at this presser because there were so many more sweeping issues to discuss in 30 minutes before Cardinals PR cut it off, and I had my hand up every time, and they didn't call on me to ask a question. That's fine. I got to ask my questions in a more private setting after the fact, but. That doesn't even scratch the surface of what could be coming as far as a decrease to payroll. I don't know if they're going to go full rebuild on 2025, but again, today did not give a good indication on the competitiveness of at least the resources that will be devoted toward next year. The only way next year's team wins, Andy, is if the young players take a step forward and the couple of moves that they might make to bring in some lower cost free agents or trade acquisitions. They really pick the right ones. They get a Seth Lugo, but they sign him for half the cost, and he performs like a Seth Lugo did this year for the Royals, because otherwise I just don't see where the expectation to be great is going to come from. They could surprise us. The Royals did that this year, but they also had like targeted moves that helped them be a better team than they were a year ago. And the Cardinals were saying, the guys that were supposed to carry us this year, we might be trading those guys away. And how we're replacing them, well, it doesn't really matter. We're beefing up the development system. And nobody's being fired for it. Except for Mike Gersh.
Mike Gersh.
Who is no longer
poor
the GM.
Mike Gersh.
He's Andy, if you could see my face when Mo said out loud what Mike Gersh's new title was going to be, I tried to keep a straight face. Maybe Mo saw it in my eyes that I was like, this is comical.
VP of Special Projects.
Vice President of Special Projects. They didn't say Mike Gersh has been relieved of his GM duty, but that's what it is.
That's what it is.
But keep in mind, Mike Gersh, when you think general manager, you might think, oh, he was in charge of stuff. No, he was an underling to John Mozeliak, who has the final say-so on all meaningful personnel decisions. And of all the times that people say that, Ollie Marmol, he's just a yes man, don't want to have philosophical differences, I'm not saying this is a negative to Mike Gersh, but Gersh's role is to be, second in command to Mo and to be able to help direct and fulfill the vision of John Mozeliak. So the fact that he's taken a bit of a fall for this, and they didn't want to highlight, like, we're firing Mike Gersh. They didn't trot it out there that way at all, nor should they have, because it would have been a joke. But just the fact that, like, technically he's getting a special title that doesn't actually pertain to anything relative to the baseball operations, this wasn't Mike Gersh's fault. He was in the business of making John Mozeliak's vision come to life, as everybody in that front office would be. So he's the only guy that actually gets whacked on this whole thing. Wild. Wild day.
Man. Tough for Mike Gersh. 875-KTGR if you want to call or text us. That was a wild press conference from the Cardinals today. Tell us your thoughts on it, 875-5847. Brad's here on the KTGR hotline. Brad, what you got?
My guys, I'm going to tell you, I was at work, so I didn't get to hear any of this. I tuned into my radio on my way home, and I'm ticked off. Like, Bill DeWitt makes the most moronic comment with our sixth youngest played more innings than anybody else. That is the dumbest thing, because all that really meant is that we were hurting so bad, we had to dig deep into our system to get people to fill holes. Mason Wynn, great ball player. But past that, there's other guys, but that is the dumbest thing you can say. The other thing I want to say is congratulations to the Royals for 100 however many losses last year to making the playoffs. You better bet that I'm going to be rooting for the Royals, even though I'm a diehard Cardinals fan. And I'm getting to the point where I'm fed up with the front office. And today, and listening to these sound bites, it is absolutely moronic garbage coming out of their mouths. And I don't know that there's anything that I can hold on to that promised me better days are ahead. It sounds like the same-o is going to be ahead, and that's terrible to feel comfortable, if I make any sense there.
No, I think you did, Brad. Appreciate the call here on the big show. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. I'm most discouraged by what Bill DeWitt says. And here's the thing. I think Heim Bloom will be pretty good. Like, don't you think? Like, I think it'll be good.
Boston fans would tell you differently, but I think you need the context to know that Heim Bloom was charged with trading Mookie Betts as his first order of business when he came into Boston, because their ownership was cheaping out, and they made him the fall guy for things that I don't think were entirely Heim Bloom's fault when he was there. This ownership group is going to also tear things down and also decrease payroll, but they're cool with it. As they're cool with not winning for a little while. So I think Heim Bloom is going to be set up to actually be able to install the system that he sees fit and bring in his guys to be able to run things. I think that will work well. I don't really think Heim Bloom necessarily needs another year of on-the-job training. He'll be focusing on getting that player development system up to snuff, and that's going to be his primary focus. But nothing's going to happen this year that Mozeliak won't tell Heim Bloom, like, hey, we good with this. Like, they're not going to put Heim in a position that he wouldn't want to be in relative to some of the player personnel decisions that are going to happen here. But I do think he's going to be very good. And one area that I think Heim Bloom will be very good is Mozeliak makes mistakes in things he says to the media. I don't think Heim ever will. He is very polished. He is very well. I mean, and I just you could tell today some of the questions were asked that he just has a very good way of not answering a question and will smile and will look handsome doing it. And there's just, it's like, all right, nothing we can really do. He's very polished, Andy, and that honestly is going to be good for the Cardinals. And it's like, he's not going to have some of that same. The Cardinals fans are just tired of Mo. Fair or unfair, I think he gets a little bit of a bad rap, but also he's done a lot to kind of earn the he said today, to your chagrin, you're stuck with me for another year.
He was like trying to make a joke, and
the poor guy has to know he's not he can't make jokes. Yeah. I think he is a funny guy, but in this role that he's in right now, with the way people are feeling about him, you know the way that's going to come off. You're not going to be able to win with a joke like that. No. Heim Bloom is going to be very well polished, and it's going to be an interesting change that I feel like eventually, as he's in charge, because things aren't going to go perfect and swimmingly, certainly not in the next few years, but he's also going to have a way that you're not really going to get him to put his foot in his mouth in the way that I feel like Mo's done. And if I'm on Cardinals PR, I'm glad for that, because I'm thinking, all right, this is something that we don't really have to worry about as much, because Mo has gotten to a point where he is in charge of everything, but he also can say what he wants to say. And sometimes I feel like if Mo had just, a little bit more, I don't even know how to frame it, but we all kind of see it playing out, right? With Mo says certain things and we immediately go, well, that was dumb. Why'd he say that? Well, I just don't think Heim Bloom is going to probably step in it in those ways. It may not be a very cogent thought that I just shared, but that is sort of the way that I view the differences between the two.
875 KTGR to call or text us. It makes sense to me. I think Heim Bloom will, be better at that PR aspect. It will matter, I think, how much rain he gets, or how much of the reins, I suppose, compared to maybe his last situation, what Bill DeWitt's going to do. Because, again, Bill DeWitt's cutting payroll also, or at least or something's changing with how they're going to handle the Major League roster, and whether that continues on into 2026 or not will then dictate how well Heim Bloom will be able to control things himself. So I guess we'll see how that all shakes out over the next year or so. But, I think bottom line is that you can't expect a competitive team next year.
Yeah, and unless they get lucky or some of the young guys take a step. But, it was very interesting. Heim had plenty of opportunities when he was asked questions today to, so, how did the Cardinals get behind? What can you tell us what was so bad about their player development? And he spins it in a really good way that, he doesn't answer the question, but why would you? You're not going to throw your new bosses under the bus. It was very well handled to where It'll be frustrating to fans, but I don't think you'll be able to take those Heim Bloom sound bites and say, well, here's where they really stepped in it. Here's where they put their foot in their mouths. I don't know. I feel like Cardinals fans are mad, but also what else did we expect to come from today, Andy? That's sort of where I'm at.
Right. 875-5847. Give us your thoughts, Cardinal fans, on that press conference today. The big news was that John Mozeliak's back. 2025 will be his final year as the Pobo. Heim Bloom is going to take over after that. In the meantime, Heim Bloom's going to be charged with revamping the player development system, and then he'll take over full operations on the baseball side. The most discouraging thing to take from this is that the guy that absolutely cannot be fired, Bill DeWitt Jr., was the one that seemed the most clueless. And that's what's most disconcerting to Cardinal fans, because we also don't get to hear from Bill DeWitt very often either. And when you finally get a chance to ask some of these questions of him, he fails to acknowledge that things were ever wrong in the first place, while also saying we need to make major changes. And that just, the duality of those two messages is confounding for Cardinals fans. And I get it if you're listening to that as a Cardinals fan and saying, what the heck are we doing here? That's what it is.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Andy, that Bill DeWitt's not going anywhere. And the reason that you're bringing Heim Bloom on to oversee a lot of these issues are because you got behind in these areas. And look, Gary LaRocque was the director of player development that's retiring after the year. He wasn't fired. And today Mo even said after the press conference and speaking with reporters for a little bit longer, said that he feels like the criticism Gary LaRocque is taking, that he's kind of getting a bad rap on all this. But at the same time, it's very clear what happened. You got behind in player development. you didn't invest enough resources in it. So who is to blame for it? Okay, I feel like that's DeWitt. If there were more resources that should have been invested financially and it didn't happen yet, okay, Mr. DeWitt, why didn't that happen? Why didn't you invest in it? Well, we have good players. We have good young players. And we had that stat that he tried to rattle off about the 6 youngest players played more innings than anybody. That felt like one of those things that they asked specifically, like, PR, can you look up a stat that'll make this look kind of good? And like, here's the stat that we found that shows that our young players are... I mean, it falls flat, man, because there is no accountability for, you know what, I'm Bill DeWitt Jr. Under my watch, we fell behind in an area that we were once dominant in, and I regret that deeply, and moving forward, we're going to make changes that allow us to get back to where we belong. That's all he would have had to say. But I think there's too much pride in, well, we've been a winner for a long time here. Not sure if y'all know that the Cardinals have touted that attitude for far too long relative to the actual production on the field in recent years. And that's a sentiment that comes from the highest station of the organization, the owner of the team. Mozeliak has it too, but he doesn't have it on its own. DeWitt champions that all the time, but they're not the same Cardinals that they were X amount of years ago. You can push back if you're DeWitt and say, well, it's not a few years, it's not this many years, it's where you're at now, though. So we can argue semantics on how many years it's been trending in this direction, but you're missing the forest for the trees if that's the argument that you want to cling to.
Yeah, Grant.
Yeah, I just kind of to that point, the Cardinals claim for a while how they are, one of the most successful teams. They're consistently winners. And from, I'd say, 2008 to about 2015-ish, that was the case. You went on a run, 2 World Series, multiple NLCS appearances that most organizations could only dream of in that time. And I think Cardinals fans would even think now that they probably should have won another World Series or 2 in that period with Mike Matheny and the end of La Russa, beginning of Mike Matheny period. But then, 2019 is your only NLCS appearance and you didn't win a game in it. 2015 is the last time you won an NLCS game, and that's becoming 10 years now. So that is
far... That was 13. 15, they got swept by the Cubs. So in the LDS.
Yeah,
so 14. It's been even longer than that.
Yeah, you're right. 14 was the last time they've won an LCS game, and that is far too long for a team that keeps saying how winning they are, that once they get to the playoffs, if they do, it feels like you whimper out also there too.
Yeah, and again, it seemed like he was giving the press conference in 2016 instead of 2024 when things had started going south.
And to that point, he was also asked today about comments he made when they fired, I believe it was when they fired Matheny, comments about 500 baseball isn't good enough in St. Louis.
Yes, I think that was Matheny. I thought you were going to say something about Schilt. He made comments about both that were ridiculous.
No, he was asked by a media member about, you said at one point, in some towns you can go 500, you can have winning record, but that's not good enough in St. Louis. You need to be making the playoffs, going to World Series, etc. And he was kind of had that placed in front of him today, but he sort of kind of deflected from those comments. It's illogical to think that you could make those comments, but then now that you're in a different situation, but not really taking accountability or responding to it by firing people as he did then. And look, I don't think firing Ollie Marmol would have been the answer with this, Andy, but that is sort of what people would look at and say, you're not really making the changes relative to how far you've fallen as an organization. What changed? DeWitt really had opportunities today to, I think, acknowledge the fall and just didn't do it. He kind of pushed back and took issue with the questions rather than allow to understand that there was merit to the questions, because it speaks for how the fans are feeling right now. And he basically said, the way the fans feel is wrong. I mean, that's how those answers come off to me.